You're listening to We're All Gonna Die Anyway with Jess Wiener. Don't worry. This is a joyful podcast about life, death, and everything in between. I don't even know where to begin to describe my guests for today's show. I'm going to paint you a picture. The year we meet is 2007. I'm on a trip with my family to the Bahamas. My second book has just come out, and we're taking a little vacation before heading back to Miami for a book signing. And the Bahamian airport is closed. There is something wrong with the radar. There's no planes coming in or out. We're literally stuck for the entire day in the airport, and my book signing is that night in Miami. And I'm freaking out. My family's freaking out. We're online, this long line at a ticket counter, and sitting on the floor in front of us is the LaFrance family. Andrea, David, Connor, Emily, and Brittany. Although if I said them in a different order, they would go by A, B, C, D, E. They are playing cards. They are laughing. They're delightful, and it was a welcome distraction to all of the stress we were all feeling trying to get off the island. Literally, we struck up a conversation that has lasted and a friendship that has lasted for more than 13 years. It became a chance encounter, and then it became a friendship, and then it became a tragedy that nobody expected. And it's now a connection and a relationship that I hold so near and dear to my heart. So today's conversation is a personal one for me. I'm going to let Dave and Andrea tell you about the accident that killed their son, Connor. And that death was not the ending in so many ways for them. It was actually quite the beginning of a different way of living in the world. The way they handled the death of their child was so inspiring to me. And that's a weird word to say around something like that, because I don't know how I would imagine I would handle it. I just know what I saw them dance with was such grace and forgiveness and compassion for themselves and each other in the midst of such an incredibly unimaginable loss. And the way this couple lives their life, and you're going to hear their story. They are very good storytellers. They're going to take us all the way through their life together. They do not choose stress in this world. I'm sure their life is not perfect, and I don't mean to paint it as though there's no problems. Clearly, they've had some tremendous losses and ups and downs like so many of us had. But I want you to listen today to the way they navigate through those tough moments, because for me, that is a part of the good life. Just because we call it the good life doesn't mean it's always good. It just means that the ultimate vision and intention is a life that feels good to you. Doesn't mean it's always going to be good. That's almost impossible. That is impossible to have as a human being. So it's how do we make a good life where we rebound and become resilient from the things that knock us to our knees. And that's what Andrea and Dave have shared with me. It's what they show me. It's what our friendship allows. And so to have them on this program was so sweet for me, to be able to have them tell you how what was and is an incredibly tragic loss really gave way to so many things in the world. And if you're listening and you've lost somebody, there is a point of our conversation that I think is quite magical and spiritual, where Andrea talks about and Dave talk about being open to receiving signs from people that you've lost, how they come through to you, how you can look and feel them with you every day of your life. I don't want to give too much away. The conversation was so sweet and so important because, again, this moment in time where they were once strangers and now we're friends, and we've shared some of the deepest lows you can imagine and some of the highest highs. By the way, postscript to this is they ended up coming to my book signing and celebrating with me. And that's just who they are. They celebrate life and they make the good life, even when things feel really bad. And I think it's a message we could all use right now. So it's my honor to introduce you to my friends, Dave and Andrea LaFrance. Let's dig in. okay, so we basically collected and found each other almost 17 years ago.
Yeah.
I just remember it just felt really natural. There's just people you meet in your life, I think, that you just kind of go, okay, we're just going to be in each other's lives, and shared some really high highs and some really low lows. And
Indeed.
that's also so
And we still have a
special.
smile on our face, and we're still living life, right? So
That's right. That's
yeah.
so right. So I don't know some of these things about you. So I was excited to ask these questions because I always ask folks on the show to start actually with their birth story. So let me start with Dave. Dave, do you know anything about your birth and what it was like for your mom, and anything special or interesting about when you were born?
I was a very difficult birth for my mother.
You were.
Yeah, the most difficult of all. I have three brothers, one older and two younger, um, and um, and I was the most difficult and the longest. And she mentioned something recently about it when we talked to her. And
I'm trying to think what she did say something, but I can't remember.
it's just something like, I came out crying after 15 hours of birth, and she said the doctor, she had interrupted from like a happy hour party. So he spent a couple hours getting his head back in shape, I guess, to
Oh
help
my
with
God.
the birth.
Great.
And then I came out screaming, and she's like, "You've been a pain in my butt ever since." No.
But she's still talking about your birth story even now.
Oh yeah.
Where were you born?
In North Conway, New Hampshire.
Oh my gosh.
Northern New Hampshire. About I don't know, maybe 2 hours south of the Canadian border, up in the Mount Washington Valley area, which is just gorgeous. That's where I grew up.
That's incredible. Andrea, what about you? Where were you born? What was your birth story like?
Lancaster, Pennsylvania. My parents were very young, and
how young?
My dad was 18 or 19, and my mom was the older woman. She was like 20 or 21.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. And I don't really know about my birth per se. I just like a couple funny things were my baby picture, my newborn picture. I have one eye open and one eye closed. And if you look,
like you're winking, or like you were like,
no, completely closed. The one eye was completely closed in my picture. And if you look closely at my eyes, they are different sizes.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, isn't that funny?
I've never noticed that. Okay.
I don't know. And then another funny thing I remember is, back then you didn't have car seats or anything like that. So my mom had me on the lap of coming home from the hospital, had me on her lap, and they drove into my father's parents' driveway. And my grandfather was a police officer and just like tough. And he was like, "Give me that baby." I was the first grandchild, and and he had 3 boys. And my mom was like, "Okay." And she just handed me over. But my grandfather and I were like this. Like he tried to be tough, but he was just a big teddy bear.
What was his name?
Charlie.
Charlie. So Dave, when you think back to your childhood in New Hampshire, what would be like 3 words that would come to mind to describe your childhood?
Ooh. In childhood would be, I guess, through high school.
Yeah.
I guess sort of like passion would be one, which was I was thrust into family circumstances where I watched my 2 younger brothers and worked to help the family make ends meet. And the passion that I had was for family, I guess. And I made a decision to stay at home when I could have left, and help work and pay the rent at a young age in 7th grade. And so I had these 2 little brothers that I just loved, and I would watch them every night, and I would be there in case they woke up. And so I had a very responsible portion of my life very young. And so it was responsibility, I guess, might define that. And then my passion is I had always loved motorcycles and skiing, and I became a ski jumper that I went away my last 2 years of high school to Lake Placid, New York, and I was trying to make the Olympics, and I tried out for Calgary, the Calgary game. And it was very easy for me because like I was just single-mindedly focused. So it was a passion for that. I was responsible enough, I guess, to figure out that that's what I was going to do.
Yeah.
And then I was probably very carefree would be my third one, which was
Yeah.
I didn't really care what other people thought about what I wanted to do and how I was going to do it. So,
where does that come from? Is that something you saw modeled in your family, or is that just a kind of a way you came into the world?
man, I think it's the way I came in the world. My dad is an accountant, and very meticulous.
Right. Not
Very,
the image you think of with carefree
right.
necessarily.
Yeah.
Very measured. And I'm definitely not like that. And I'm more like my mom, where free and easygoing and talks to anybody and loves to talk and loves to thrive in interaction with people.
Yeah.
Um,
I
so
love that. So it's interesting because that all makes sense. And just even how I know you, that passion for family then was really born at a young age. And so you weren't resentful necessarily for those additional
I
responsibilities.
wasn't then, and I'm not now. I'm actually thankful because it really did ingrain into me at a very young age, that family was important, and you need to really kind of do anything to help your family members when in a time of need. And as a result, I was a little kind of outcast, if you will, a little bit with some of my friends, because I
Sure.
couldn't understand going to the mall and driving around the parking lot and jumping in the push carts and playing smash up derby at midnight, because
Right.
I had to work the next morning. So I'd be like,
Yeah.
I'm done. I'm going home. You guys, I can't figure this out. So I was a little bit maybe too mature at times. And then, of course, with my carefree attitude, I was probably a little not mature enough sometimes, because I always had motorcycles. I did a lot of things that I'd look back and just shake my head, just because at that point, I'm 16, 17 years old, and you think that you're immortal.
Right.
So I'm very thankful to be here sitting next to Andrea, being interviewed by you to talk about it.
I know, that's so incredible to me and makes total sense. This is what, see, I didn't know this, but it also makes sense. So what about you, Andrea? Like, what would your 3 words be for childhood in Lancaster?
I know, I was just trying to think. I'm like, okay, well, barefoot, definitely. I was always barefoot. Always, always, always. In fact, one of my friends to this day, I took my mom's car was in the garage, and I took my mom to work. And so I rolled out of bed, and I never wore shoes in the car, but it was illegal. Like, I knew it was illegal to not have shoes on.
Oh.
And an older gentleman pulled out in front of us, and we totaled my car. We were both okay, which was fine. But my first thought, once I realized my mom and I were safe, was that, oh my gosh, I'm going to get in trouble. I don't have shoes on, right? So How
old were you for this?
I was 16.
Oh my God.
It was my first car, a little Pinto.
Oh my God.
And it was the first time my mom had ever ridden in the car with me too. So it was just like, oh my gosh. So my concern was, I need to find shoes. So I just went to an apartment and knocked on the door. And I said to this girl, I'm like, we've just been in a little accident. Do you have shoes I can borrow? And to this day, she is still my friend.
No way. Of course she is. That's how you collect people.
Of course. So barefoot. We were always, I'm from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and it's Amish and cows and cornfields, and everybody's barefoot there.
Oh my God.
So I miss being barefoot, actually. You can't be barefoot in Florida grass as much,
Yeah, for sure.
The
beach you can, yeah.
The beach you can. But so barefoot would be one that comes to mind. Social, definitely social. I mean, that is my soul, I guess. That's what makes my heart beat. I love people, and I love meeting people and engaging, and even when it's back in the day when you could debate, even.
Right.
I love debating in like social settings or whatever. I mean, now it's different, different.
Yeah.
But and then I guess the other word would be independent. Like, I've always been pretty independent. Bought all of my own cars and started working at 14. And when I was 18 or 19, I guess, I bought a Chevy van, like a Scooby-Doo van, with a homemade bed in the back. And I said to all of my friends, hey, I'm going cross country in this. Whoever wants to come, like, it had the brown shag carpet and everything. And I was like, whoever wants to come can come. And at the time, it was my boyfriend at the time. And we made it as far as Arizona, and then had to turn back. On $1,200.
Because she ran out of money, and he didn't bring any money to help at all. Money. So it's all Andrea.
What a deadbeat!
Totally.
But were you wearing shoes on that road trip?
Oh, I'm sure I wasn't. I mean, I'm sure I had some somewhere in the van.
In case you get in an accident.
case I got in an accident. I had them handy.
Scooby-Doo van with brown shag carpeting.
Oh my gosh. When I find the picture of it, I'll send it to you. You'll get a kick out of it. It was pretty funny. So yeah, always independent. And then when I got bit by the travel bug, that was it. And so after coming home from the van trip, I got a job with Continental Airlines, and that's how I met this one.
You did. How old were you guys when you met?
So we were 21.
I wasn't 21 yet.
Okay.
When I met you, so.
20 and 21. 20 and 21.
He's a younger gent, is he?
Yes,
yeah, not by much. 6 months.
Like 6 months or so.
Yeah.
And Dave, were you already working for the airlines?
Yeah, so we both worked for the airlines at the time, Continental Express, and I was in Manchester, New Hampshire, and she was in Harrisburg, and I flew down for an air show to watch, and I was sitting in the back of the plane because I was a station agent, I threw bags and such.
Okay.
And
so you weren't flying then?
No, I started flying lessons, private pilot license lessons, and I had switched my goal from becoming an Olympian and ski jumping to becoming a pilot. Wow. Professional pilot. So those were my two kind of lifelong career goals that I've only ever had. And so she parked the plane. She was working the ramp, and I remember walking off the plane, and there was no jetway or anything, right? Just an old prop plane. And when I walked up the stairs onto the tarmac, I looked at her, and she was up front, and she had these gray dicky shorts on, work shorts, and these cute little work boots, tan work boots with the cutest little legs, and she had this little smile, and I was like, woo, she's a cutie. And that was it.
That was it. And you guys have been married now, what, 30 years?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Been together 30 years now. And it was, the funny thing is too, neither of us were looking for a relationship. I had just had a bad breakup. I wasn't interested in boys, guys. He was trying to focus on finishing college, flying, and but we couldn't deny it. So
we were the first texters or emailers, I guess, right?
Yes.
So
yes. I said we actually, we were.
Do you have an AOL? You still have an AOL email, by the way.
I'm the last remaining member.
I do too, but I use it for my subscriptions.
Oh my God.
But I am an AOLer too. You can't take the Gen X out of me. I don't care.
I know. I agree.
Continental had a lost bag system, and you would text. You would put into the computer the station you wanted to send to, and then a period, and then
a message.
And then you would create a message, and you'd hit send. And then it would show up on the printer at the station that you were trying to contact. And so we used to communicate like that.
So you'd hear something printing out from the machine.
The dot matrix printer.
And my coworkers would go by and be like, oh, Andrea, there's a message there from that guy from New Hampshire.
Did you keep it clean, Dave, or not so much?
He did.
Yeah, for that I did.
He did back then. He wouldn't have.
Total random side story, just speaking of technology, I studied abroad in my junior year of college to Greece, and I was in a serious relationship, and we could only communicate really via fax, or we would make tapes for each other. But I would go to our student center and just fax and fax and fax to my heart's content until my parents called, and my dad was like, why the hell do I have $1,000 phone bill, right? Because remember how expensive it was to communicate.
Yes. Oh my
gosh. This is what's so interesting as I hear your origin stories a little bit is the things I've loved and noticed the most about you as people, this independent streak, or to Dave's point, this passion for family and connection. Sounds like it was both very similar in each of your lives, right? I mean, you each had a responsibility or accountability as a young person that most young people, especially today, but even back when we were growing up, didn't really share.
I think
we always worked. We each had it was so funny because we each had 10 different jobs in high school, going through high school. And it wasn't because we got sick of one. It was just we'd have 2 or 3 at a given time. And I was still doing sports, but we always wanted our own money. I bought my first car at 16. She bought her first car at 16. So we have very similar independence like that. And that continues to this day, I guess.
And I think we were uniquely mature even when we met at our ages.
Yeah, because you were so young still when you met.
So young. But we, instead of, and I can understand how people when they marry young can grow apart because you're still discovering yourself, of course. But luckily we remained together, kind of grew up together.
Yeah.
And I remember talking to my mother the day after I met her for the first time. And I consciously did not tell my mom that I just met the girl I was going to marry because I didn't want to jinx it. But I wanted to tell my mother the next day that I had met the
Aw.
girl I was going to marry. I mean, really, it was that
Yeah.
it was that powerful with
It
us,
was wild. Yeah.
and it still shows
Mhm.
today.
Yeah. I know. I do. Well, you know what's funny too is though I've always heard stories like that and felt it when I met Felipe, but didn't have that experience until before Felipe, where it's just a
Yeah,
knowing. You know,
yeah,
I've
yeah.
loved other people, but it was like
Well,
not
sure.
until it just you feel it. And then I remember thinking like, oh shit, this is like a real thing. Like this is a real
Yeah,
thing.
it's touching
I
my soul.
know.
Yeah.
Mhm. So, in your formative years, did you have any losses or deaths that you had experienced as kids in your
I did.
family or in your friends? You didn't,
I
Andrea?
did. I had a close friend who died. He was a senior in high school. He was born in 1968 and died in '86. So,
Oh wow.
it was a week before his birthday. And the interesting thing was, he was a senior. He was a ski jumper. He's a friend of mine, Tim Mulkern, and he didn't go on senior skip day because he was a cook at his parents' Irish pub, and he was going to work for the day in the kitchen, while all his buddies went to senior skip day to go to the beach, in Portland, Maine, and
Yeah.
spend the day at the beach, being seniors. And he was on his way to work at his parents' restaurant, and he was in an automobile accident and
Oh,
passed away. And that affected me pretty big, in terms of, it
mhm.
was my first, somebody that I saw on a daily basis that
Yeah.
passed away. And I just remember, things come back when we talk about Connor, but all I wanted was some piece of Timmy. I didn't care what it was. I didn't
Mm.
care. I would take anything, and it was very difficult. His parents had basically locked his room up, and
Mm.
and we'd gone and visited with his folks, Tom and Tess, and but I wanted to find the car, because I was just going to take like a stereo knob from the car or something,
Mhm.
and the
Mhm.
car had been because other kids had done that, they'd moved the car, so I'd never gotten anything other than a prayer card from him, from his folks. But Connor's middle name was Timothy, named after him. And
Oh.
yeah. So
And when that happened, Dave, like, did you have a framework of which to talk about death in your family? Like, had death and loss been something you were familiar with, or like, was it a shock? Did the adults in your life talk about it?
so a next door neighbor, Julie's sister, a few years earlier, well, probably about 5 years earlier, her 16-year-old sister at the time had passed away in a carnival accident. One of
Hmm.
the scramblers chairs had come off the
Oh my
Just
God.
arm
freaked
and
me
and it killed her. And her family, they were neighbors, and Julie was my best friend growing up. Their family took all the pictures of Lisa down and refused
Wow.
to talk about
You can
her,
never talk about her again.
Yeah.
because it was too painful for the parents. And it was just sad, because years later, Julie came up to me and said, my advice to you, if you're interested, is cherish, 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 and talk as much as you can,
Hmm.
because that's
You
what's
didn't
going
get
to help.
to.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so to answer your question, I had only seen kind of a denial of death at that point. And then, of course, as you're high school kids, it's a very difficult time to handle
Totally.
life in general, never mind loss like that. And we ended up having some great parties where we all got together, and there was a lot of crying and a lot of drinking at that age, even though we were high school, and that's how we dealt with it. But we had some amazing bonding experiences
Mm.
as friends and loved ones of Tim's that I'll never forget.
Yeah.
So
That's incredible. And Andrea, you didn't have an experience like that growing up.
Well, I take that back. My both my grandfathers died when they were 57,
Oh my gosh, that's
and
young.
yes, very young. And my mother's parents always lived right next to us, so my whole life they lived next to us. And then my dad's parents, I told you about my grandfather who was
Yeah.
a police officer, um, who I was close to. I remember seeing him in the hospital, and he said to me, just promise me you'll live a good life or whatever. And I just couldn't hear it, and I ran
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
And then it was probably, I mean, he was sick in bed at home my grandmother was a nurse, so she took care of him, her and my dad. And he was a skeleton. But I went, the last time I saw him, I was in my prom dress with my boyfriend at the time, and we went to see him. And I had wished I had never seen him like that.
Yeah, it's stuck in your mind.
It did. But my mom's father had died first, and I remember going to the funeral. And for some reason in my head, so I was probably 15, I guess. And in my head, I didn't know that it was going to be, I thought it was going to be a closed casket. So as soon as I walked into the church, I saw that it was an open casket, and I ran back out and went to the car crying.
Wow.
And people came out and were like, you should come in. He would want you to be here. And I was like, no. And I refused, and I didn't go back. So that was my only experience with death. My grandfather that I saw prom night, he was cremated. So it was, I went to the cemetery, but it was a different service. And then Connor actually was the very first close person to me that I had ever lost. And because I told Dave in the beginning of our relationship, I said, listen, I don't do funerals. Like, I just don't do them. I'm not doing them. So I'm like, if you die before me, I love you. Just know that I love you, but I'm not coming to your funeral. And I meant it. And I meant it. And
what did you think when she said that, Dave? What were you thinking?
Well, she's a very independent, strong-willed woman. And I know,
I'm aware.
and I know when she's like, I'm setting my foot down, and that's that. And you can't, one thing about dealing with death is everybody's entitled to deal with it any way they choose. Yeah. Now, there's, in my opinion, there's better ways to deal with death than other ways. But you're entitled certainly to make your own decision. And her decision was, hey, listen, I love you to death, but I just cannot handle funerals. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah. Because unlike, with my grandfathers, I had to see one from a glimpse in the coffin and one in, the last night he was alive. And I didn't want that. I don't want that to be my last memory. I wanted, I want to remember people, our good memories and the way they were. And, and so I just didn't want to ever face that. But then,
and then life comes and gives us exactly what we don't see coming in a lot of ways. But I want to talk first. I want to talk about Connor, of course. And I want to talk about, so you have 3 children. So you meet young, you're beautifully aligned in so many of the values that you hold dear in the way you want to live life. Were you on the same page about having babies? Were you like, let's start making little humans? Like,
yeah, we just looked at each other and we started having babies. It worked out very well.
It sure did.
Did you have similar? You had fun practicing and fun.
I didn't think about it. It just happened.
There was no practice involved.
It just happened every time. 3 times.
Right.
What were your births like for Brittany, Connor, and Emily?
Brittany, I went in very open-minded. I'm like, people surely exaggerate. It's not going to be that bad, like you see on all the movies and stuff. It was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. But I closed down and I closed my eyes, and nobody knew I was in as much pain as I did. So it was all natural. And back in the day they did episiotomy. It was just like, it was actually a terrible experience, really terrible. And the recovery as well.
Yeah.
But then when I got pregnant with Connor, I told Dave, we didn't find out. We didn't know we were having a girl or boy, the first one. We only found out with Emily. But with Connor, I said, I was petrified when I found out I was pregnant again. And I was like, I can't do that again. I just can't. And so I told Dave, I'm like, all right, if I can't speak, you need to tell them to give me something, And so, and so, because I went from 0 to 60 with all of my, like, I didn't really transition into it. I kind of went full on. And so same thing happened with Connor kind of. And as soon as they gave me the epidural, I felt like I do now. Like I was like, oh, Dave's like, you're having a contraction. I'm like, all right, I guess I'll try to push, It was, the last half hour or whatever but you can deal with that. So then Emily was, a month early.
And it was by choice. And at the time I was just about to start my Air Force flying career. I'd been in for 5 years, part-time in the Guard. and was headed off to flight school. I'd finished college. And so the doctor said, well, since you're not going to be here for the birth, why don't we just induce her a month early? And so they checked her fluids and a lung and stuff and said,
that's crazy. Yeah.
And induced her a month early. So Emily, actually, who's, in school now, working on her doctorate, she's kind of like, I think I'm still tired to this day because you had me come out of the room a month early.
She wasn't ready yet.
She wasn't ready
yet.
So now it's our fault.
So now it's our fault. But
anyway, but Dave got to be there for the birth, so that was great.
I was.
That seems about right. But I love asking about the origin stories all the way to the birth, because I always find that there's just little interesting tidbits about how we begin our lives, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether the story ends up being metaphorical for the rest of our life or not.
Right.
But it's just so interesting,
and in
right?
Emily's case, apparently.
Yeah. Well, and Connor was 3 times as big as any baby.
Oh yeah, so he was
really
9'6", and he was huge, just huge. And it was very, he came out, and this was a funny story. So they asked me if I wanted to take like a refresher course on how to bathe the baby. And I was like, sure. And they asked if they could use Connor. So I'm like, sure. So we go, I always joke and say that he screamed until he was like 4. Like he was just like,
he was colicky.
He was just mad.
Wow.
He was just mad. And I'll explain a little bit about why that was. But so they used him as the example. So here's this 9-pound baby up there, and he's just screaming his little red head off. And I swear every other mother, their sleeping baby girls, their 6-pound girls are just sleeping silently in their arms. And I'm like, are you sure? Like, I honestly thought, are you sure that's mine? Like, are you sure that is my kid? Because I don't know about that. Yeah. And so it's pretty.
Why do you think he was so angry?
So I think and angry, I guess, isn't the word. Angry was probably a good word when he came into the world. And my mom kept commenting, she's like, wow, he just looks like a grumpy old man. He always had his brow furrowed at you, and he looked at you like, you are just dumb. Like, that's how you felt. Like, but he's
even as a baby?
He's an infant. I tell you, I swear to you. And so he was just very different than Brittany. Brittany was like really the perfect child. Like, she was just easygoing, self-sufficient. Connor came along and screamed. And luckily for me, I worked full time while Dave was finishing college and working part time. So he stayed home with the colic baby.
And I went to night school.
Like, I never believed in colic either. And Connor had colic. He screamed his off. And but I think he was upset. I'll say upset.
Yeah, that's.
I think I honestly, even at the time, I felt like he would see a toy, for example, across the room, and you could tell he wanted it. But he didn't want me to go and get it for him. He wanted to do it himself. Mm-hmm. But his body, he was in an infant body.
Right.
So I think he was just very frustrated. And then when he passed away at 14, I was like, you know what? It kind of was a little bit enlightening to me, because I'm like, I think somewhere deep down in him, he knew that he only had a short time on this earth, because
he wanted to go.
That is how he lived his life.
Yeah, every day.
I mean,
honestly.
Yeah, I do.
And he just lived his life like he was a doer, and he wanted to accomplish stuff.
Yeah.
So.
That's so fascinating. See, I just believe in some of the imprints. I know people grow and change, of course, but I do think like who we come into in this world, we kind of have somewhat of a little bit of a set course, like when Dave, you were saying like you're carefree, and yes, you may have gotten some things from your mom, but that hyperdrive and that focus that you had for skiing and for motorcycles, like Connor shared a lot of that too, didn't he?
Yeah,
very
definitely.
focused.
And
so when did he start his career in doing that and his writing?
So he was just a natural athlete. So he golfed, he skied, he snowboarded, he played tennis, he played lacrosse, anything. He would pick up something, a sport. And the very first time he did it, he could have been professional, probably. You know what I mean? If he had stayed with us. Yeah. Yep. So his main sport from the time he was 5 until he was 13 was hockey. That was his main sport, but he did all those other things all the time as well. Anything with wheels as well. And then Dave had done a little bit for fun, motorcycle racing with a group of people. And when Connor was 12, he said to Dave, he's like, hey,
but
Dad.
Go back to his first bike.
Oh, yeah.
So he always wanted a dirt bike. Always, from the time that he was
So he was like
3.
3. Like he was little. He was like 3 and a half. And he started
Wow.
asking for a little dirt bike, like a little one. And we said, well, buddy, it's a lot of money. So
we said, listen, if you raise half the money, we'll double it. And now at this point,
I'm not kidding you. He was 3 and a half, 4 years old. Like he was young, very young. Yeah.
And he was like, fine. So we have neighbors that bought rocks from him in his wagon
when he was 5 and 6
5
and 7
years old.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, what are you selling rocks for? He's like, to buy a dirt bike. And one of the neighbors laughed so hard because she said, I think I bought a rock that used to be in my yard for
$7.
for $7. And then he started selling hockey trophies.
Oh my God.
Yeah, he was a little entrepreneur from the beginning. And what's really sweet, just a little side story, at his funeral, 2 of those old neighbors, and they had been from years before that we had lived in that neighborhood, brought the rocks to us.
Oh my gosh.
I know. Wasn't that so sweet?
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So he's just, he also, what I remember of him, especially in the airport, because I remember what I really liked about him was he was also a little bit of a schemer because we were all trying to figure out how to get food in the airport. And I remember we were trying to figure out like where there could be like, closets that had food in it. Like I just remember, trying to figure out where to get snacks. But what I know about you, at least from the outside as parents, was that you didn't really put a limit, sounds like, on any of your children, but let's say especially with Connor and this passion and drive to, and so as he was doing all of these sports, but ultimately passed away riding a motocross bike, right? And did you have conversations in that as parents of worrying about, like, did you put worry and fear about what could happen in those situations? Or Dave, because you had such an adventurous, athletic life as well?
So Connor was on 2 wheels almost every day of his life when he started at like 5 years old. And so he had all these dirt bikes growing up, had never raced, but always in the backyard riding. And I was racing amateur wise, road racing, and he'd come to the track and hang out. And then me and my teammates, we all go dirt bike riding in the afternoon together. And he just had a hoot. And so I didn't let him ride and race until he was,
when he was 12. He just asked if he could try it. And he kind of just took off from there. But the year that he passed away, I had a teammate pass away as well in a motorcycle accident.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
And we went to his funeral, and Connor and I did.
Okay.
And it was.
Did he pass away from riding?
Yeah, on a track, leading a race in the front of the pack, and crashed, and then the pack kind of overtook him. And so, and it's amateur road race. I mean, we're racing for trophies, which we're not really. We're just racing for fun. It's not for money or anything. And so, I brought Connor that, so he was very aware of the dangers associated with it, but he was very similar to me, and you don't focus on the danger. You're focused on your passion of the love of the sport, and how you can be on 2 wheels as much as possible because that's your passion. So he was well aware of it, and obviously we were too. Never in a million years do you think about it.
No.
I was gonna say, I never remember us discussing
like.
I'm not a person that worries in general. Actually, I worried more about, Emily was a horseback rider, and I worried more about her on a horse because it's an animal that, has its own will. Whereas on the motorcycle, you kind of have control of it, so I worried more about her than I really didn't worry about Connor. He was very confident and, did well,
extremely skilled
immediately.
Talented. Extremely talented.
And you guys were not, because I remember, Andrea, you and I talked on the day that accident happened. I remember we were flying. I was flying somewhere, I think, when you and I was on an airplane. You probably don't remember. I mean, it's like, but I remember you telling me because Dave, you were with Connor, and you were in where? You were in
Birmingham, Alabama. Harbor Motorsports Park.
And then, Andrea, you went out to see them. I think I was talking to you or we had connected at some point as that was.
We probably talked when I was in New York because I was trying to call people, and it was well, I don't know if you want me to get into it now, but how it all went down. But so they're in Birmingham, and Emily's in the middle school, Brittany's in high school at the time, and two of my girlfriends just happened to show up, and they were painters, so they were finishing a painting job in our house, and but two of my best friends from New York, and so they were leaving. I was walking them out, and then this friend Mary came, and she was a hockey mom or whatever. I didn't know her that well actually at the time, and so the four of us girls are in the driveway talking, and then Dave's younger brother whips into the driveway in his car and says, "Hey," pulls me aside, "Connor's been in an accident and it's not good." But again, I didn't worry because I don't prematurely worry. And I just remember thinking that, well, I have to get there. And it was at like noontime in New York. And I went in the house, and Dave says we talked. I don't remember that conversation with him, but I just remember I had to get there. So I came out, and my three girlfriends were like, "Listen, we've called the airport, we've called the airlines. There's nothing, getting there until much later in the day." And I was like, "No, I have to get there right away." And of course you can't drive there. So Mary, who became our angel, literally angel, the woman that I didn't know that well, the hockey mom who happened to stop by, she worked for a private jet company that flies like rich and famous people around. And so she made a phone call. She had never done this before. She made a phone call and said, "Hey, is there anyone who is not
currently
scheduled flying today?" And there were two pilots in Long Island that were just taking a plane up for just like
a maintenance flight.
And they said, we can.
Oh my God, I did not know that.
Yeah. I mean, I know it still gives me chills to this day because they were all supposed to be there. Then my friend Laura went and picked up Brittany at the high school. Jillian went and picked up Emily at the middle school, and I packed a bag for the three of us. And they drove us to the little airport, and that's probably when I called you, because I was trying to call as many people and get prayers going and all that stuff. And and so that was how we made it
in time. And so for me, my day started. So he was getting ready to test for a professional race team, and so he's 14 years old, and he'd been identified as a top racer, certainly in the U.S. and in the world by Red Bull KTM team. And so we had gone down to try out the track because he was going to test against a couple other kids that were from the South that knew the track. And so we literally just went down for a track day weekend, no racing. Well, he might have done a couple just amateur races, but it was just to try to learn the track. And we sleep in it. So we drive down together. He sleeps, I drive. I drove all night from New York straight down. And then the two things I remember is the air mattress had a hole in it. So we woke up on the wood floor of the enclosed trailer, which was horrible. And then I forgot coffee filters, and I was trying to make coffee with paper towels, so I was trying to get hot coffee. And since it wasn't a regular like national race weekend, there's no vendors, there's no nothing. So I was just trying to find coffee. So that was my stress that morning, which was a sore back from sleeping on the ground essentially. And then being grumpy because I didn't have coffee yet. And then, so he was going out on the track with a young kid named Thomas Porta, who his dad had flown up with him from Colombia to do the same very thing that I was doing with Connor. And Thomas ended up making the team. And then at the time he didn't speak English, but I've talked to him years later because him and Connor would go out on the track together on a similar bike, and they had similar talent. So they were two peas in a pod, and they were just going out playing. And then he ends up having just a very, very silly, what should have been a very minor crash, 100 yards away from a manned ambulance. And it ends up costing him his life. At that point, it was certainly not known that it was that serious. Right. But they came to me, found me in the pits, and said, "Hey, listen, he got hurt, he got banged up pretty good. We're gonna life flight him out. We're gonna airlift him out, just because the hospital's kind of far away. But don't worry."
Wow.
So I thought it was actually I didn't think it would turn out like it did. And then a wonderful girl who worked at the track drove me there to the hospital and sat with me. And that's when I'd been coordinating with Andrea. And in the time that Andrea had departed New York and was airborne, he had come out of surgery. And so I was just sitting in a waiting room with my new friend who was from the track, and they came in and just said, "Hey, do you want to actually go see him? He's in the recovery room in ICU or." And I said, "Yeah, that'd be great." And then when I went in, I just assumed that he would it would be quiet and that he would be sitting there resting.
Right.
And it was a very frantic scene that I came upon.
Oh,
and
wow.
there was about, I don't know, 6 or 8 people that were actively working on him in ICU.
Wow.
And so I kind of really that was kind of the point that I realized that this was quite serious. And and then they allowed me to go to the head of the table, and I just stroked his hair, and he had this beautiful red, beautiful curly locks. And I just talked to him, and for the first 2 hours, I talked about fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting. And this was his most important race he was ever going to race.
Yeah.
And then when I kind of realized that it wasn't going as well, we couldn't get him stabilized to get him back into surgery, and they basically just hadn't stemmed the loss of blood. And so he went through over 90 pints of blood fighting, and he basically broke the blood bank of all their blood. As he fought and fought and fought, and you could tell, and that he could hear me. And then it just got to the point where I knew that at this point it wasn't going to be a winning battle. And that's when Andrea arrived, and I had to meet her at the elevator, which is the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life. And I kept the girls behind, and I had to take her in to say goodbye, and that's a very difficult thing to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was very obviously unexpected. And but I immediately was so thankful, and it will be for the rest of my life, that when I went in there, he passed away less than 2 minutes later.
I remember you telling me that.
I made it.
So it was,
even though he wasn't awake, or but I hoped that he and so it was a shock for sure. I mean, you just,
of course,
I always say, you turn on the TV and you see these sad stories, or you read these sad stories
online or whatever,
and you think, oh my gosh, that's terrible. But then you get up and you go back to your life, right?
That's right.
You just never expect it to happen to you.
That's right.
And so it literally, I mean, I would say for at least the first 6 months after he died, I would wake up in the morning, every morning, and be like, was that just a dream? And I'd have to tell myself,
hope it was a dream. Yeah.
It
was a dream, but I had to tell myself, no, that was real. And I kind of would have to go through it all again.
Yeah.
And, it was, it was just like nothing I'd ever.
But I'll remember walking out of the hospital.
Yeah.
And we're walking out of the hospital. We've just left our son behind, and we have girls.
Yeah.
And he says to me, I forgive you. We're not out of the hospital yet. And I said, what do you forgive me for? She said, for the guilt that you're going to go through. And
I just knew that he would feel.
And I still have it to this day. I mean, I still haven't processed it all. And I brought him somewhere, and I didn't bring him home.
Right.
I'm a dad, and he's my son. And so I had committed to driving him back to New York in my race trailer. And Andrea just said, she said, listen, he's with God, and he's not with us here on earth, and your 2 daughters and me are, and we need you. So you need to fly home with us. And so we had another benefactor let us borrow their plane to fly us home.
Yeah. And to this day, we were never able to, we asked to have names, so we could contact the pilots and such, and nobody wanted any credit. They were just,
Yeah.
You had some serious divine interventions in those moments.
Absolutely. Everybody was exactly where they were supposed to be. He called his parents and said, I don't know where they were in New Hampshire. So 5.5 hours away at that point was where they lived. And he called his parents and said, I don't know where you are, but you need to get to New York because Connor's been in an accident. And they said, we're almost there. They were in Vermont. He didn't know they were coming to visit him. I mean, so everybody was exactly where they were supposed to be.
Yeah.
It was just
Okay.
it was actually pretty heartwarming.
Yeah. But it's also, does it still feel like a blur when you think about that?
Yes, of course, I don't go revisit that.
Yeah, very often.
Unfortunately, after Connor died, we had probably like 10 kids that we knew of.
Really?
That died. Yeah, like in the years to follow. Maybe not that many. Maybe that's a stretch, but a lot, like just an unheard amount. And so
all from different experiences.
Different.
But all in your community up in Saratoga.
Yeah, and but Connor was the first one in like 10 years that had been young. And the day that we got back, somebody mentioned when we were picked up at the airport
from Birmingham,
from Birmingham, and they said, hey, listen, there was supposed to be a hockey game tonight. It was canceled, a high school hockey game. And the mayor is holding a vigil, I guess, if you will, right now at the hockey rink. And we said, well, we want to go. And we literally
went in.
Surprised. We walked in as they're talking about Connor, and the whole place was
packed and just
quiet. And that was really our first thrust into the spotlight of how to deal with this in a public manner. And we didn't even talk about it, obviously. It just happened. But we were well aware that the community and all his kids reacted appropriately to how we reacted. And so, to this day, everyone's like, Mr. and Mrs. LaFrance, you were our rock. And we couldn't handle it, but we knew you could. So if you could, we knew eventually we could handle it too.
How about that?
And so it became immediately us focusing on all the wonderful things about Connor and what he did in his short time, and bringing them out and talking that. And we loved that everyone would talk about him, and we shared all the stories, and people shared stories with us. And we could go onto this podcast for 3 hours about cool stories, but we had one lady that showed up that her son was bullied at school, and he was overweight, and Connor came across a couple kids picking on him and said, if you ever speak ill to this kid again, I'm going to kick the crap out of you behind the school. And so the kid went home when Connor passed away and said, I lost my protector. Oh. And so there's a lot of stories that came out after he passed away that we had no idea about. And
but you learn more about your child.
Oh my gosh.
It was important stuff, right? That's the important stuff. He donated one lunch a week to go into a mentally challenged class and show his race tapes. And he'd always ask me for tapes on the races,
but never told us.
And I never asked. I just would give them to him, and he would spend his lunch hour hanging out with all the kids, showing about his racing, and never said a word to anybody about it.
And that's what makes us proud. We're like, it's great. He was a great athlete. That's all fine.
He was a great person.
Wonderful, great person. And that was proud of him. And, and also the fact that, he died doing what he loved. And that is so important.
And it defined who he was. And it was, there was an article that came out in the local paper of a local news anchor that criticized us and said that that's why he teaches his kids golf and not letting them motorcycle race. So it was a very polarizing back then
it
incident.
Didn't affect us as much as it did our friends who
wanted to come to our
defense. Years later, he apologized in his newspaper column. And he said, this is only the second time in my whole career that I've ever apologized. And so,
it's so a big part of your story. And I remember this. I wasn't able to go to the funeral. I know we You use the poem "The Dash,"
Yes, the dash.
yes.
Yep.
which I have read on this show and talked about a little bit. So I think when people do listen to this episode and watch this episode, I've talked about how incredible you are in my life and like role modeling for, and I'll tell you why. Role modeling for my experience with you is role modeling for the way to keep a loved one present,
Yeah.
regardless of what plane they happen to live on right now. And that this joy for living hasn't decreased for you, although I would never, dare to take away any of the pain or the layers of complexity that exist in losing a child. But you have not, at least in my experience, let it thwart your living, and you're raising your girls, and you're remembering and honoring Connor in the work you do and the way that the way that you live. And the one thing I was going to say about your experience was community has played a huge part.
Oh, they were amazing. It was
incredible.
such an amazing outpouring. From we're in the middle of a renovation of our house. In the day that it took us to get home, they had 30 people had gone in, all artisans, and had installed the hot water and cold water to the shower, and put in a sink, and put in flooring. I mean, just done all this stuff for us. And then meals for a month. We had people dropping on meals, and it was all organized. And to thank everybody, and nobody wants thanks, you just want to help. And it was just the outpouring of love was just absolutely amazing. And then, for the wake, when there's a 4-hour wait to get in, and the funny story that I recall is a lady pulls up next to the line and says, who died, the mayor? And the response was, no, somebody much more important than the mayor.
You're like, ah.
Yeah, but you also gave back to your community, because from this experience, you created a foundation, right, in Connor's memory. Can you talk about that?
So, Andrea and I immediately had decided that we wanted to create as many positive outcomes in life due to Connor's short life. I mean, it was that, how much love can we give back in honor of Connor? Because to us, you can choose to sit in your darkened room with the curtains drawn and a bottle of whiskey, and you're entitled to do that if you lose somebody. I just don't think it's productive, and in our opinion, it doesn't honor their memory. So we wanted to honor him as much as we could, as many ways as we could, and so we started a foundation. Our biggest fundraiser was a 5K, and it was a community event where we hired an ice cream truck and had a guy dress up for us to give ice cream to the kids. There was a fun run for little kids. It was an all-day barbecue event, and in the end, the foundation raised and gave away, or I should say, awarded almost $100,000 in scholarships to local students, athletes that. And it wasn't who has the best GPA and is going to the greatest school. It was who has a chance at actually being successful in their passion and need help. And so there was one kid we gave a $2,000 donation to that had been adopted by a family in Saratoga, and he was a football player, and he got a football scholarship to go play college football. But he had no immediate family, he had no financial support, and he needed a computer. So we had him research what he needed for a computer, and his scholarship award was enough to buy a new Apple MacBooks for college. So we were very involved in how we could help, pinpointing specifically. We helped figure skaters try out for the Olympics. We helped a boxer try out for the Olympics, a female boxer at that. And so we were so excited to be able to give money that generous people helped donate and raise for us. And it was just wonderful. And it ran its course in about 10 years. I in my mind, for some reason, I thought 10 years was a good time at the time that I formed it. And at that point, Connor became a memory to talk about, whereas before that, it was always, oh, he was my older brother or sister's friend, and there was much more of a connection. And not that kids today don't have that same need for scholarship, but in our opinion, kind of got to a point where it had run its course in 10 years. So it was a foundation a couple of years ago, and we'd moved to Florida, so we weren't in the community. So there was a couple things, but I mean, we had just so much fun. We had logos created. Connor had a mantra that he came up with himself called "Hold It Wide Open," and he had started a weekly racing column in the local newspaper. He wanted to share with the community what he was doing. He was a mini mayor, and so he asked me, he came and said, "How do I sign my column every week?" And I'm giving him all these silly things, whatever. Keep on winning, whatever, blah, blah. And on his own, he's like, I think I'm going to sign it, Hold It Wide Open. And really, that was his life. And for those that aren't motorcycle people, it's holding the throttle wide open with your right hand, but it kind of has morphed for us into everything in life.
Yes.
Yeah, you seize the moment. And so it's called, we say hi-wo, hold it wide open. And we kind of practice it to this day.
I love it. Yeah. Well, I want to talk about the signs that come up after losing somebody, because hi-wo is one. I mean, that phrase has come up, but balloons have played. And the number 767. Talk about some of the signs that because a lot of people, when people lose somebody, I mean, listen, I had to unfortunately help my cat transition this week. And obviously my cat can't talk to me, but I was saying to her, okay, baby, let's decide on a sign. How am I going to know you're there for me? Like, how am I going to see you? And I believe in that. I believe, Felipe's dad comes to us in hummingbirds, and, my other friends come in rainbows. And so but so I think that's important, whether people believe in it or not. I don't really give a shit, but I think it's such an important way to stay connected and spirit. So tell me about the signs that have come up since losing Connor that keep him connected to you.
To the people that, that are listening, if you're not open to the signs, they're never going to happen.
That's right.
And so you have to have a belief that there's something other than where we are today. And what that is we all don't know. Right. However, there is something. And if you just open your eyes a little bit and accept, the love of life that life gives you, you'll see signs. And if you keep closed, then it'll be harder. But
So the first big one, I mean, huge, and it would have been good enough probably for the rest of my life, but I still appreciate the signs, so keep them coming, Connor. But the first big one was, so he died in September, and then June 1st is his birthday.
Which is in a few days from now.
A few days.
27. Yep.
And so we had, at the hockey rink, we did a big release of balloons. So we had hundreds of balloons or whatever. And so at the end of at the start to the drive to the hockey rink, we put a cluster of balloons. So there's maybe 5 balloons clustered together, tied on there. So I grabbed those as we were leaving, and Dave was away. He was in the Air Force at the time, so he was away for work for a couple of days or something. And Emily was sleeping with me, and we lived in the 3rd floor, an old Victorian house, 3rd floor, really windy, 2 sets of staircases, right? And so we're on the 3rd floor. Emily's asleep beside me. It's a school day. Brittany's asleep on the
5 sets of staircases.
Yeah.
5 sets to go up 3 floors. Yes.
Oh, yeah. So Brittany's asleep on the 2nd level. And I'm sleeping on my back, which I never do, which was kind of strange. I always slept on my stomach at the time. And I'm sleeping on my back, and none of our alarms go off. So Brittany's alarm didn't go off. My alarm didn't go off, which is weird. And I get woken up by feeling something brushing against my lips and nose. And I open my eyes, and there are those 5 balloons hovering above me. Now, there is absolutely no explanation for how they got there, because they were downstairs on the 1st floor in the back of the house, above the dining room table. So they would have had to travel through to the front of the house, go up all of these staircases and around, not just around.
Yeah.
Then when you came into our bedroom, they would have had to go a sharp right and another sharp right, dip down and touch my face. There's just no way. And so I immediately got this huge smile, because I knew it was Connor. I just knew it was. And I did ask the girls, I'm like, did you, I woke them up and told them what happened. I'm like, Brittany, did you bring the balloons up to your room? No. I mean, they were definitely downstairs on the 1st floor. And so then, you know, we get ready for school, and the kids ready for school, and Brittany goes, and then Emily, I have to drive to school. And so she gets in the car, and I turn on the car, and the song that just starts playing is "I Need a Sign to Let Me Know You're Here, Calling on an Angel." Now, Emily's only 11 at this time, so I don't know if she picks up on this. And I look back at her, I'm like, "Do you hear this?" And she's like, "Yes." And we were just, you know, probably both like in happy tears again. We just couldn't believe it. So I'm like, I'm kind of on cloud nine. It sounds weird, but it's just like, what an amazing, incredible thing that just happened, you know? And if Dave had been home, it wouldn't have happened. If our alarms had gone off, it wouldn't have, you know, all of these things. So I'm telling some of my girlfriends throughout the day what happened. So our friend Jillian picks up her son Connor from lacrosse practice that day, and she goes, "You're not going to believe it. You know, Mrs. LaFrance just told me the story about these balloons," and his face got all red, and he got, you know, kind of flushed and emotional. And he goes, "Mom, yesterday I prayed to Connor, and I said, will you just show his family a sign to let them know that you're okay." He didn't say, "Show me a sign to let you know you're okay." He said, "Show his family a sign to let them know he's okay."
Yeah.
And that was like the first of many. That was the big one.
Yeah. That was
big one. And so, and back to like real quickly, the balloons, one of our other hockey mom friends from Saratoga just messaged me yesterday and said, I was going by that house we're talking about, the old Victorian. Yesterday, this happened yesterday to her. She was like, "I was going by your old house, and a young boy came out of the house carrying one single red balloon. Only do red balloons."
Yeah. So.
Was that the house that I visited you in? Was it the Victorian one, or was it in a different one?
Yeah, Victorian one downtown.
Yeah. In that one? Okay. I couldn't remember.
So I believe in this so much. And I think what Dave, what you said feels very right to me, which is to being open to the signs. And I also really love something else you've been saying in this conversation, which is that people have lots of choices in how they're going to relate and respond to a passing or a death of somebody that they love, and nobody really knows how it's going to affect them when that happens either. But I'm curious, because one of the other things that I noticed you have and you continue to do is, so you would always sign your emails or your cards or whatever, A, B, C, D, E, right? So we've got Andrea, Brittany, Connor, Dave, and Emily, and you haven't stopped with the C. You never removed Connor when you.
It's interesting because if someone says, "How many kids do you have?"
Yes.
I mean, we have three. There's no. And then they're like, you know, and usually what's easier is, you know, they go, you know, what is it they're doing? And you're like, well, our oldest is Brittany, and she's in Australia, and we have a son, and our youngest is Emily, and she's in school right now. And you kind of go, and then unless they say, well, what's Connor doing? Unless they, you know, specifically ask,
where's your son? Yeah.
Sometimes, because people don't know how to react when you say that.
So we never want to put them in a position.
And we don't want them to be awkward about it. But if it happens, we're very comfortable to talk about him because we love him so much, and we are so proud of him, and we're happy to talk about him.
Right.
Not an easy thing. It just happened to be easier for us, I think, than a lot of people right from day one to talk about it. And it's interesting because the beauty and horror of life sometimes is life goes on. Because the next morning after Connor passed away, we went to a breakfast restaurant, like a Waffle House, and I couldn't imagine why people were just like eating like normal.
And because going on with,
of course,
like nothing happened. But our scientist passed away, and then the beauty of life is life goes on, and at some point you have to agree to join life again, and hopefully it's sooner than later, and hopefully you can do it in a way that honors your loved one. And us, it was, we immediately, we just had such a great group of friends and family, and a lot of the kids all wanted to be part of us. And we gave away every stitch of his clothing. We gave away his mountain bike to his best friend. And it was like, I just remember when my buddy Tim passed away, I wanted something of his. So we were very immediate. And I just remember the funny story about all those little girls in his room. And the only thing that was left was his socks and boxers.
He had individual socks. They're like, I'll take it. I'll take it.
And they took all his socks and boxers.
Aw.
And that's all that we had left because we'd given away all his t-shirts and his jeans and all that stuff.
You know.
But it was so important for them to have something to hold on to.
Yeah.
And,
Well, the thing about grief that I've learned in my life, and I'm still learning, experiencing it currently, is, and somebody's been saying this to me, that grief is in proportion to the love that you experienced.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that you grieve is the, you know, I think somebody said like grieving is the cost of loving, right? That there's like, you know how deeply you've loved in that way. And it's so apparent to me in witnessing just all of over these almost decades at this point, how this has, I mean, even in our relationship and friendship has it, you know, you are the kinds of friends with me that, you know, lots of time can pass and then we connect over a drink or we get to see each other over or feel each other over text. And it's like right there. But I want to kind of end with a couple of questions that I think people who would be listening would be curious about. I think you explaining and sharing how you've processed as a family, like, you know, how you kind of have taken this into folding it into your experience of being alive and living. But I'm curious, as a family, actually, what do you think is a big lesson that your family has learned from experiencing a loss like this in your family unit, your immediate family unit?
Well, I think that overall we reacted. I mean, I would have never expected myself personally to react how I did as far as dealing with the grief and the loss. But we were always easygoing and we were always very supportive of our kids. And when Connor passed away, it actually made us more like we were telling our girls, live your life, like, you know, experience your passions and experience joy and happiness. And that's what we want for you. And, you know, none of us have a lot of time. And Connor's life was very short and we still are here and we still.
So we sent one daughter to Australia.
Live.
We sent one daughter to Spain for school. And then our youngest Emily, she went for a year backpacking trip across the world, around the world for a gap year. And people are like, how can you let one of your kids go? And it's like, it's easy because we can text them, Facebook them, Zoom them, and keep in touch. And we want them to experience the joy that life has out there. And we don't want to keep them for us because at some point we're not going to be here. So we want them to be independent and worldly and to be go seize the world. And so we've encouraged them to fly the coop even more, which you would think would be contrary to what people would do.
Yeah. I love that. What have you learned about loss from this?
I think that it's ever present, but the pain dulls over time in our experience, and I think that you need to kind of choose how you're going to react to it. And I think once you make that decision, it just perpetuates itself. So you know, I have the person that passed away the same year as Connor from our race team. His dad just never gave up the anger to this day, and it's unfortunate. My heart goes out to him, but he became so toxic that my entire race team cut him out of our lives because we didn't want to be around him because he was so caustic. And so once you make that decision to, like, you know, to spread the love and spread the good stories of the person, it perpetuates itself, and then it just becomes it's something you enjoy talking about. The pain slowly softens, but you get joy from talking about that loved one.
Yeah.
And for me, it was, as I said earlier, I was anti-funeral, and so Connor's wake was 10 hours of receiving people, and I honestly don't. It's kind of strange, but I don't remember shedding a tear that day because all of the love. And so I remember that morning, I'm like, all right, I gotta, you know, find a black dress, right? Because that's what you wear to funerals. And I went to reach in my closet and I was like, no, I'm going to wear Connor's favorite color, which was hot pink. And I wore a hot pink, like, nice linen dress.
Love it.
And I can't tell you how many women, especially, would standing in line at the wake, they saw me in the pink dress, knowing that that was Connor's favorite color, because he was at the time the only boy who liked pink
And would wear it.
and would wear it.
Love it.
Dyed his hair pink and everything. He was
Oh.
just a wild child. And but that brought comfort to a lot of my close girlfriends. They said as soon as they saw me in the pink dress, they were like, she's going to be okay. And so I don't remember shedding a tear that day, but every hug I received, I gave back, so it was just the sharing of love. So 10-hour wake, very long and, emotional, yes, but it was wonderful actually. In some ways. And then the next day was the funeral, and I had never been to the church. And that day I woke up and I said, I can't do this. I can't do this. I could barely get out of bed. I showered and then I crawled back into bed, and one of my girlfriends crawled in with me. And I honestly didn't think I would be able to speak or even not even get there, but I got there, walked into the church. It was a whole beautiful ceremony with lots of people talking, telling funny stories and wonderful stories.
Coaches and teachers all came up to us because it was obviously it happened rather quickly. And one of his teachers said, I if you guys wouldn't mind, I would love to speak a little bit about Connor. And we were just like, we would love it because Connor adored this teacher.
But he didn't like school.
He didn't like school,
but he had some great stories, and it was wonderful. Shared. And then it was a very poignant moment. I remember we went out, Dave and the girls and I, and we were in the limo, and we were and the driver wasn't in the car, and we were watching everyone still come out of the church. And we went to roll down our window and it wouldn't roll down, which was actually kind of good. So we sat there at least I was like reflective, and it was just cool to see all of our friends from all over. And I remember thinking, you know what, if I had one word to describe these last 2 days of the services, it would be beautiful. It was so beautiful. And I will never, ever forget that feeling. And and so it just changed my whole mindset on funerals. And now I'm like, we need to celebrate people when they pass away. I mean, yes, it is sad because we're going to miss them. Our fur babies too, any type of loss. But what a beautiful thing to have these memories. And we are especially fortunate in these days where we have the pictures and the videos.
Right. And I know that I know that ultimately, as parts of your living legacies, you're living into all of the values that we've talked about today, that still that carefree and, deeply loving spirit, that commitment to community and to family. And I know, Andrea, you're talking about maybe at some point helping to talk to others, right, about end of life planning and talking about these things, because I think one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the program, out of so many, because I love you both very much, is that I believe that there will be people hearing this and experiencing this and watching this that can pull from this when needed. Maybe they don't even need it right now. But I think just seeing lots of ways that people can manage and handle loss is inspiring, actually, because you can choose you can have lots of examples. But tell me about the legacy that you kind of hope to shift maybe in the way that people are thinking about end of life.
I just remember the, at the funeral home, the men, these men in dark suits, and they're handing me the binder to pick out a coffin. And I was just like, what? It just was very, obviously it's a terrible time and sad, and you're grieving, but it also, I was like, this could be, after reflecting on it, I was like, this could be so much better. Just like picking out, wearing what you want to wear to the funeral, and for Connor's, for the after service, we had all of his favorite foods. That's it. We only had Connor's favorite foods. So we had strawberry smoothies, we had
macaroni
pizza,
and cheese,
grilled cheeses.
I love it.
Only Connor's favorite food. So what I would like to see and help people with is try to think of it differently. It doesn't have to plan ahead, have it be more of a celebration. Then it doesn't have, and if you want it to be traditional, that's fine too. It's each for their own. But I hope that when I die at my service, that people are going to be joyful and just remember me and have a good memory of me, you know, and I
Yes.
want them to celebrate, and I want to help them. I want to help others, you know, figure out how to celebrate their loved ones, and really honor their
Yeah.
memory, and in fun, goofy ways, possibly, you know, just something
So like
different,
meeting with
not
somebody to
traditional.
plan their own funeral
Yeah.
ahead of time
So
to make
maybe,
it interesting.
Yes.
right. So maybe
Yeah.
somebody, an example would be somebody gets a, you know, has a terminal illness, and they know that they're going to be leaving this earth soon, and they want to be a part of planning their own
Or
day.
a healthy person.
Or,
Right.
or a healthy person. Yeah. So, yeah.
I
So,
was going to say, maybe I can volunteer to be one of your like guinea pigs as you're developing this system, because I think this is something Felipe and I are talking a lot about right now. I want to joyfully and proactively
Yes.
talk about and decide together
Yeah.
what we'd like, God hoping we control it, right? Or have any
Right,
sort of
exactly. That you
Sure.
have the ability to. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
do we, what do we want? What are our preferences? And so will
Right.
you use me as a guinea pig for that?
Yeah, I'd love
I
to.
mean it. I'd love it. And then we can share it here and we can share it with people,
Yeah.
because I
Yeah.
love that. I feel so grateful that we stayed connected after that
Yeah.
wonky Bahamian airport.
I know.
Yeah.
It was meant to be.
It
We
was
had
meant to be.
We had to go through that hardship, right, to get to where we are now.
Well, I think it's always like you find your soul people in life. And I feel like you are that for sure. And I'm so grateful that you shared the story and we're able to open up to those spaces. That's very sacred for me. And for those that are listening, I don't take that lightly. And so thank you for,
And listen, it's not all, you know, I'd be remiss, or we'd be remiss in not saying that we immediately went to counseling for the kids.
Good.
We had counseling for the kids. We had counseling
oh,
for
that's
us.
great.
And I think it's important that if you have lost someone, that you go and you talk to a professional, and some people will have better success than others.
Yeah.
But that was an important first step for us to like understand how we can deal with our feelings. And so if you're listening to it now, I would say that's a great first step to
Yeah.
try to start the road to recovery. And we're thankful for all the what it's social workers and therapists
Yes.
that help us. And Emily went to a camp for a summer,
Mhm.
and that
Yes.
was by
It was a hospice, through hospice.
no, but
They
who's
covered
the
kids.
famous actor that died? It's his camp.
Oh, Paul Newman.
Paul Newman's
Yeah.
Double H Hole in the Wall Ranch
Mhm.
Huh.
was a great tool. But so I think it's important that
Yes.
you know, throw that in there, that there is professional and there's free programs for you that are part of the
Yes.
community through the hospital that you can look up and
No,
be.
I love that you said that, Dave, because I think it's all part of individual stories, but to be rooted and grounded in that kind of professional support is important.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
again, I think the big thing maybe out of this conversation is that everybody's experience will look different, will feel
Absolutely.
different, but the community and the sharing, which is what this conversation is also about, that has tremendous healing power. And
Yeah.
so whether you're, able to get professional help to share it with other people, I think is just also a gift and a blessing too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we had so much love given to us. We try to give it back. So, I mean, it really
you do.
is. It's just it's the circle of life, right? And you get what you put into life, you get it back. So we're trying to give back because we receive so much love from this. So
Well, you are, and I'm sending you lots of love from over here. I love you so much.
Thanks for having
you.
us.
I know. Thank you.
Just one of the bazillion reasons why I love Andrea and Dave, their generosity and their graciousness in sharing their story and using it as best they can to uplift others. I think probably two of the things that I am taking away most from this is the continued theme of community and how powerful community is in our healing and in sharing our grief and in helping to remember the people that we love and that we lose, and how we kind of rebuild ourselves in and amongst our community. I think Dave and Andrea have had the blessing and the fortune of having a wonderful community, but it's a great lesson for us to think about how do we become a good community member for people who might be going through something like this. So I'm thinking about that. The second thing that I'm thinking about is, and I don't know how you feel about this, but I really do believe in signs. I communicate with people who are no longer here through lots of different ways. We talked about Felipe and his dad talk about hummingbirds. That's always his sign. For me, it's feathers. Sometimes it's rainbows. For Andrea, it was those red balloons, and that story for her about being woken up with the red balloon and feeling like Connor was there. I remember when she told that to me the first time. I hadn't heard it in a while, and hearing it again just reminds me that there's a lot of things we can't explain, and I will gladly take those signs to think about the loved ones that are no longer here with me. But I'd like to know what you think. So let me know if you have any questions or what kinds of thoughts you're having after listening to this program. Maybe we'll have Andrea and Dave back on and we can continue some of the conversations. As always, I'm grateful for your listening, and I'll talk to you soon. You've been listening to We're All Gonna Die Anyway with me, Jess Weiner. You can follow me on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. And you can also watch this podcast by checking out my YouTube channel for filmed episodes, behind the scenes footage, and all other kinds of amazing video goodies. And of course, you can always visit me at jessweiner.com. We're All Gonna Die Anyway is exec produced by me and produced by Lauren Chavez Myers. Our episodes are recorded, filmed, and edited by Jeff Franklin and Adam Lippert of B Film. And our original amazing music is by Becca and Destiny Petrell. As always, I want to send a special thank you to the love of my life, the amor de mi vida, Felipe Lopez. And if you love this podcast, please make sure to tell your friends, subscribe, and leave a review at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts. Most importantly, if there is something that stood out to you from today's episode, I want to hear about it. So if you want to share your own story, leave a comment, ask a question, please send me an email at podcast@jessweiner.com. I can't wait to hear from you. Bye, babies.